What's good to the tribe? I know we have a lot of different tribes out here, so let's research on some of them. Let's get it.
Fair use. So today we're going to talk about Choctaw. The Choctaw are a Native American people originally occupying what is now the southern eastern United States, modern-day Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Their Choctaw language belongs to the Muskegon language family group, Hopewell and Mississippian cultures, who live throughout the east of the Mississippi River Valley and its tributaries. About 1,700 years ago, the Hopewell people built a great earthwork mound located in what is central present-day Mississippi. It is considered sacred by the Choctaw. The early Spanish explorers of the middle 16th century in the southeast encountered Mississippians' culture, villages, and chiefs. The anthropologist John R. Swanton suggested that the Choctaw derived their name from an earlier leader, Henry Halbert. A historian suggests their name is derived from the Choctaw phrase, which means river people. The Choctaw coexisted as a people in the 17th century and developed three distinct political and geographical divisions: Eastern, Western, and Southern. These different groups sometimes created distinct, independent alliances with nearby European powers. These included the French, based on the Gulf Coast and Louisiana, the English of the Southeast, and the Spanish of Florida and Louisiana during the colony era. During the American Revolution, most Choctaw supported the 13 colonies, bid for independence from the British Crown. They never went to war against the United States, but they were forcibly relocated in 1831 to 1833 as part of the Indian removal. Okay, let's see what that is. Indian removal. Indian removal was a forced migration in the 18th century whereby Native Americans were forced by the United States government to leave their ancestral homes in the eastern United States to the lands west of the Mississippi, specified to designated Indian Territory, roughly modern Oklahoma. The Indian Removal Act was signed by Andrew Jackson, who took a hard line in Indian removal but was put into effect primarily under Martin Van Buren administration. Just a little bit of history on that. Let's go back. In order for the U.S. to take over their land for development by European Americans. In the 19th century, the Choctaw were classified by European Americans as one of the 5 civilized tribes because they adopted numerous practices of the United States neighbors. The Choctaw and the United States agreed to 9 treaties. By the last 3, the U.S. gained vast land cessions. They removed most Choctaw west of the Mississippi River to Indian Territory, sending them on a forced migration far from their homelands. The Choctaw were the first Native American tribe forced to relocate under the Indian Removal Act. The Choctaw were exiled from their land because the U.S. desires its resources and to settle it for settlement and agricultural development by European Americans. Some U.S. leaders believed that by reducing conflict between the peoples, and they were saving the Choctaw from extinction. The Choctaw negotiated the largest area and most desirable lands in Indian Territory. Their early government had 3 districts, each with its own chief, who together with the town chief sat on their national council. They appointed a Choctaw delegate to represent them to the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. By the 1831 Treaty of the Dancing Rabbit, All right, let's look up Treaty of the Dancing Rabbit. The Treaty of the Dancing Rabbit was a treaty signed on September 27, 1830, and was proclaimed on February 24, 1831, between the Choctaw American Indian tribe and the United States government. This was the first removal treaty carrying into effect under the Indian Removal Act. The treaty ceded about 11 million acres of Choctaw Nation, what is now Mississippi, in exchange for about 15 million acres in the Indian Territory, now the state of Oklahoma. The principal Choctaw negotiators were Chief Greenwood LeFleur. Let's look him up. Greenwood LeFleur was elected principal chief of the Choctaw in 1830, but that the nation was governed by 3 district chiefs and councils of chiefs. Just a little bit of his history. U.S. negotiators were Colonel John Coffee and Secretary of War John Easton. The site of the signing of the treaty is the southeast corner of the Noxubee County. And just a little bit of history on that. So let's go back. Those Choctaw who chose to stay in the newly formed state of Mississippi were to be considered state and U.S. citizens. They were one of the first major non-European ethnic groups to be granted citizenship. Article 14 in the 1830 treaty was the Choctaw stated Choctaws may wish to become citizens of the United States under the 14th article of the Treaty of the Dancing Rabbit Creek on all of the combined lands which were consolidated under Article 1 from all previous treaties between the United States and the Choctaw. During the American Civil War, the Choctaw in both Oklahoma and Mississippi mostly sided with the Confederate States of America. The Confederacy had suggested to their leaders that it would support a statute under Indian control if it won the war. After the Civil War, the Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana Choctaw fell into obscurity for some time. The Choctaw in Oklahoma no longer considered the Mississippi Choctaw part of the Choctaw Nation. However, Jack Amos, let's see who Jack Amos is. Jack Amos was an American Indian and Confederate soldier. His American name was He Who Goes Out and Kills. During the American Civil War, Amos served as an interpreter in John W. Pierce's 1st Choctaw Battalion and Samuel G. Spahn's Independent Scouts. In the later years, Amos filed a federal lawsuit which rendered a U.S. Supreme Court decision years after his death. So a little bit about him. Legally changed Choctaw Nation's substance at the turn of the 20th century. In 1978, the United Supreme Court of the United States held that all remnants of the Choctaw Nation are entitled to all rights of the federal recognized nation. The American Indian Policy Review Commission's final report, Volume 1, Chapter 11, page 468 on May 19, 1977, federally acknowledged, recognized the existence of the Choctaw communities of Mobile and Washington counties, which are along the Tombigbee and Mobile rivers, where Choctaw treaties were negotiated in various Choctaw treaties. The Choctaw in Oklahoma struggled to build a nation. They transferred the Choctaw Academy there and opened an academy for girls in the 1840s. In the aftermath of the Dawes Act in the late 19th century, the U.S. dissolved tribal governments in order to exhaust Indian lands claims amidst the Indian and Oklahoma territories are a state in 1907. From that period, the U.S. appointed chiefs of the Choctaw and other tribes in the former Indian territory. During World War I, Choctaw soldiers served in the U.S. military as the first Native American code talkers using the Choctaw language. After the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, the Choctaw reconstituted their government. The Choctaw Nation has kept their culture alive despite years of pressure from assimilation. And just a little bit more history on them. But I know we talk about getting back to nature. I want to show this. Choctaw horses make a comeback in Mississippi. Once belonging to Native American tribes, these historic horses are helping their breed survive. Six-fold, fathered by a cream-colored stallion called a soda, runs across a grassland southwest Mississippi. The first new blood in a century for a line of horses brought to America by Spanish conquistadors and bred by Choctaw Indians. Choctaw horses were thought to be long gone from this region, disappearing when their Native American owners were expelled from the southeast by the government. But the surprise discovery of DeSoto on a farm in Poplarville 13 years ago led to a plan to help the shrinking breed survive. They really give us a shot in the arm, says Brian Rickman, who has been working since 1980 near Antlers, Oklahoma, to restore the line. He estimates that he has breed more than 300 of the horses from 9 mares, female horses, and 3 stallions. But having a few stallions led to a shortage of Choctaw horses because the gene pool was so small. Choctaw Indians saw great power in horses. Ivan Thomas, tribal history preserve officer of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, said their words for a horse is soba, means like a deer, and the deer was the tribe's most important animal, both economically and spiritually. So naming the horse after the deer was really saying something, Thomas said. Choctaw horses are descendant from those brought to the United States in the 1500s and later by Spanish explorers and colonists, said D. Phillip of the William Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. DeSoto was discovered in 2005. So just a little bit of history on that. How awesome is that? But I love you guys. Fellas up, tribe up, wise up, rise up.